Dune Part 2 is out, and you probably just watched it and are curious, did all this stuff actually happen in the book version? Was Lady Jessica really running around talking to her fetus the whole time? I spent most of my day yesterday in the theater watching this movie twice, back to back, and I'm glad I did because there's a lot going on here. And I'm going to try to point out all the major differences between the film and the book. Without the movie in front of me, it will be hard for me to give you a scene-by-scene breakdown, so just know that this won't be every single difference, but it will give you an idea of what is different. In the movie, we see Fremen have large caches of water. Stilgar tells Jessica that a Fremen dying of thirst wouldn't dare drink from this water. Their ultimate goal for these water caches is to save up enough to change the very ecology of Arrakis, so that it actually has large bodies of water. This is true in the book version, but there's much more of an emphasis on Liet Kynes being the mastermind behind this goal of the Fremen. We saw Liet Kynes die towards the end of the last movie, which brings us to a more significant change. In the movie adaptation, Liet Kynes is a woman having been gender swapped for the film. Not a big deal, but in the book version, Liet Kynes is Chani's father. So, Liet's death in the books is much more significant, and the recent loss of a father is something Paul and Chani bond over. In the movie, Chani is drastically different from how she is portrayed in the books. In the book, Chani is instantly more feminine and flirtatious toward Paul, and their love grows to be much stronger than what we see in the movie. There's two major changes the movie makes, which causes what should have been an endearing and somewhat bittersweet love story to fall apart. The first is the choice to make this great divide in thinking between the southern and northern Fremen and making Chani a non-believer. In the book, there are some doubters among the Fremen about Paul's ascension into their Messiah, but nothing like what is shown in the movie, where we actually are told that the non-believers are aware that the Bene Gesserit planted seeds of this prophet long ago, making this change created unnecessary conflict between Chani and Paul. It also makes the Bene Gesserit seem less impressive that their ways are found out so easily among the very people they're supposed to be manipulating. I mean, their entire order is about secrecy. The second major change is the lack of a time jump, which is the catalyst for a majority of the changes in this movie. In the book, after Jessica's Water of Life ritual, also known as the Spice Agony, we have a time skip of 2 years. During these 2 years, Paul and Chani have a child together, a boy, Leto, named after Paul's father. Having their relationship elongated and having the shared experience of having a child together created a much stronger foundation for Paul and Chani's love, so at the end of the film, when we see Paul request or demand Irulan's hand in marriage, Chani doesn't run off. Chani in the books understands the necessity of a purely political marriage, and Paul assures her that is what this will be, and that Irulan will not feel or receive any kind of affection from him. Chani is still dubious, knowing that Irulan is a princess and quite beautiful, but Lady Jessica assuages her doubts, explaining to her that history will remember Chani, the concubine, as Paul's true wife, an almost mirror of Lady Jessica's own relationship with her late Duke Leto. In the movie, we see Lady Jessica take on a much more antagonistic role right after drinking the Water of Life, and almost seeming to be following the whims of her unborn child, Alia. This decision to turn Lady Jessica, and in turn Alia, into a sort of villain is in my opinion what hurt this adaptation the most. The only reason I can think of is that Denis, the director, is pulling and remixing plot threads from the third book, Children of Dune, moving them forward, in which these two characters are a bit more antagonistic, but for entirely different reasons. So in the book, Lady Jessica is not all creepy mom talking to her unborn fetus the whole time. In the book, Lady Jessica chooses to replace the old Reverend Mother out of necessity to have a purpose among the Fremen other than as a potential wife to Stilgar. So she partakes in the Water of Life ritual, which is a much bigger deal than what is shown in the movie. Jessica drinks the highly concentrated spice mixture and uses her Bene Gesserit training to nullify the poison, altering the substance. The spice awakens her female ancestral memories so that she is fully aware of all their past lives. Doing this while she is pregnant, though, also puts her unborn child, Alia, through the same testing. Jessica interacts with and is able to soothe Alia, allowing her to survive the ordeal. But consequently, Alia is awakened in the womb, fully aware with all the past ancestral lives known to her before she can even have any of her own experiences. She has to fight just to retain her own sense of self. So Lady Jessica and in turn Alia are both Reverend Mothers after the ordeal, even though Alia is still not born. Jessica then allows the Fremen to have their spice orgy, in which they all share from the now converted water of life and feel their minds connect, during which Paul and Chani run off into a secluded room to make love for the first time. I'm not surprised this part was cut. After the time jump, Alia is 2 years old, and because of her having been awakened in the womb and having all the experience of the past female ancestral lives, behaves as a full adult would, except in a 2-year-old's body, with the same mischievous childlike compulsions. The Fremen have difficulty accepting Alia's strangeness and call her an abomination. Hera, another character absent from the movie adaptation, has a mother-like protectiveness of Alia and assists Lady Jessica in making the other Fremen come to accept Alia. Hera was the wife of Jameis, the man Paul killed at the end of Part 1. After returning to the siege, Hera, by Fremen law, along with Hera's 2 children, become Paul's responsibility. Paul allows Hera to be a servant to him rather than accepting her as full wife. I'm not surprised Hera didn't make the cut, with the gender role practices being outdated, but Hera's relationship with Alia is quite endearing. Lady Jessica retains her sense of self throughout the book and is not ever possessed by her unborn baby or manipulated by Alia in any way. She assists Paul in becoming Muad'Dib, fulfilling the prophecy created by her Bene Gesserit ancestors through the Missionaria Protectiva. Lady Jessica does have tension with Chani, not finding her to be the proper bride for her son, who should instead be marrying for political gain, despite having her own reservations and having been Duke Leto's concubine. The Lady Jessica is welcoming to her grandchild Leto, but is cold towards Chani. The Lady Jessica never manipulates Paul or the caretaker of the Little Makers, the baby sandworms, into allowing Paul to drink the water of life. Instead, Paul secretly drinks 1 drop of the water of life by his own accord, wanting to become the Kwisatz Haderach, and open his mind up to see more clearly. Paul then goes unconscious and is in a coma for 3 weeks. Lady Jessica finds her son but is unable to discover what ails him and instinctively sends for Chani. Chani arrives not knowing why, and Jessica shows her Paul. Chani, knowing Paul and sensing the spice odor on his lips, understands what he had done. She begins to demand Jessica alter the substance just as Paul wakes up, having finally altered the drop inside him. Jessica and Chani in the scene are much less openly abrasive toward one another, and Jessica actually starts to accept Chani more as her daughter-in-law after this moment. Later in the book, Jessica, having fully come around, actually advises Paul to marry out of love and let Chani have the thing which was denied to her. As we know, Paul doesn't actually do this, but it is a nice sentiment. Chani also does not slap Paul after the reawakening. In the movie version, we only get 1 brief scene of Paul glimpsing adult Alia, played by Anya Taylor-Joy, which is the correct casting choice. In the book, this scene never happens. Alia's final role in the book is that during a raid by Raban on the Sietch, where the women and children are, Alia allows herself to be kidnapped because she doesn't want to be the one to reveal to her brother of his son Leto's death. Other than the killing of Paul's infant son and the willing abduction of Alia, the raid is a total failure, with the women, elderly, and children pushing back the forces, barely allowing any to escape with their lives. Alia is next seen with the Emperor Shaddam IV on their ship with the Baron and Gaius Helen Mohiam. Alia banters with the Emperor, revealing to him that Paul is on his way. The old hag Reverend Mother accuses Alia of being an abomination. Alia is able to be in her consciousness, tormenting her due to her awakening. When the attack happens, the Baron attempts to grab Alia, who then slashes her grandfather's hand with the House Atreides Gom Jabbar, poisoning and killing the Baron. Alia then escapes and assists in the battle. So Mentats in the Dune franchise are essentially human computers by evolution of the species to fulfill the gap of not having actual computers. In the Dune universe, AI has already risen against humans and fallen, so they're banned essentially. In the first movie, the Baron had a Mentat, Piter de Vries, advising him using data to predict strategic maneuverings and opportunities the Baron could take advantage of. In Part 1, Piter dies in the poisonous gas Leto emitted in the room from the fake tooth in an attempt to kill the Baron. That happens in the book, except that the Baron then replaces his Mentat with the House Atreides Mentat, Thufir Hawat, and attempts to control him through manipulation, which I'll get into momentarily. This is where things get a bit confusing because Thufir, to my knowledge, disappears in Part 2. I don't believe he died in Part 1, and I can't recall either time watching this movie if it was mentioned that he had died. So maybe someone in the comments can enlighten me as to what happened to him. Either way though, in the book there is much more confusion around who the traitor is. The reader knows right away in the book that it's Dr. Yue, and we get to see how the Baron was able to trick Thufir into thinking the traitor is Lady Jessica. So in the book, both Thufir and Gurney Halleck are under the impression that Lady Jessica was the traitor, not the Doctor. The Baron continues to hold this vital piece of information from Thufir while making use of him to try to restore spice production on Arrakis and wipe out the religious fervor forming around Muad'Dib. He also puts a safeguard in Thufir by way of poison, which the Baron is nullifying by antidote, and should he stop giving Thufir the antidote, Thufir will die. During the throne room scene at the end of the book, Thufir has the opportunity to kill Paul with a poison needle and is ordered by the Emperor to do so, but after realizing that he had been manipulated and that Paul is Muad'Dib and had survived and that Jessica had been innocent, Thufir instead redeems himself by staying his hand, allowing himself to succumb to the poison and die. Also, evidenced by his actions and thoughts in the book, Thufir had been attempting to get revenge on the Harkonnens from within, which I'll get into soon. In the book, Paul has had Mentat training, and once his prescient vision becomes unlocked by the spice, it's his Mentat ability that allows him to analyze raw data from the past, present, and possible futures so effectively. In the book, he begins surpassing the mind of his mother quite rapidly, actually finding a lot of her conclusions to be slow or incomplete. In the movie and the book, Gurney joins up with the smugglers after the events in Part 1. The major difference is that after reuniting with Paul, Gurney still believes Jessica is the traitor, and so when he is alone with her, he puts a blade to her throat. Paul then has to talk him down and explain his error. In the movie, we also finally see Gurney play his balisette, which he is known to do in the books, except in the movie version, his song is treated kind of like a joke. In the books, he is actually very skilled at it, and his songs are much more serious. Stilgar is fairly similar in the book, except in this movie he appears to be treated as comic relief a bit too much. As I mentioned earlier, the whole southern versus northern viewpoints isn't a thing in the book. I think this is meant to replace something else from the book, which is the rising voice amongst the younger generation of Fremen for Paul to challenge Stilgar in combat and take control, becoming their leader. Paul gives a similar speech in the book, although it's a bit less aggressive and he uses more logic to convince the Fremen to change their ways. So before I get into the events on Geidi Prime, I want to say that the Harkonnens are a bit more one-dimensional in the movie and just purely evil. The Harkonnen family is cruel and weird, but this was amplified in the movie. They are not a bunch of naked mole rats in the books. That was a stylistic choice along with all the color saturation, particularly in the arena fight. The Baron is evil and cruel in the book, but he is also much more clever and has a lot more sadistic humor and personality. He is always cautiously plotting and murdering his way to power, guided by his Mentats, which sort of just disappeared from this adaptation. In the book, he also has a proclivity for young boys and frequently has them sent to his room for entertainment. Understandably, this aspect of the Baron was cut. Instead, the movie just liked to show him bathing in that weird black liquid and murdering his staff when he's angry. Most of what happened on Geidi Prime happened in the book. although in the book, the scenes take place before the 2-year time jump. It is Feyd-Rautha's 17th birthday, and he is fighting the last of the Atreides captives in the arena for sport. The major difference in this scene is that it was Feyd-Rautha taking advice from Thufir to have the slave not drugged. It was a subtle ploy to possibly get Feyd killed while attempting to play the Baron and nephew against one another. There is a scene from the book where Feyd attempts to assassinate the Baron by way of one of his slave boys, and it narrowly fails. Thufir was secretly playing both sides, trying to avenge the late Duke Leto from the inside. The only information he wasn't ever privy to till the end was Lady Jessica's innocence. In the movie, the arena scene is altered, and it is the Baron that has the slave not drugged in order to make his fanatical playboy of a nephew look more like a hero. After the arena scene in the movie, we see Lady Margot Finring follow and subsequently seduce as well as test Feyd-Rautha. In the book, Lady Margot Finring leaves Lady Jessica a coded message warning of the planned Harkonnen treachery on Arrakis and the danger to her son and Duke. I can't even recall if this message is in the Part 1 movie, but if it is, this is the same woman who left it. The biggest difference in this scene is that Lady Margot is accompanied to the arena by her husband, Count Finring, who is a good friend of the Emperor. The Count is very aware of his lady's Bene Gesserit plans and allows her to secure a daughter from Feyd-Rautha. In the Dune book, it is actually Princess Irulan who is recounting information from various different texts that she wrote chronicling Paul Muad'Dib's rise to power before each chapter. So it is nice to see her kind of fulfill that role. Unless I'm misremembering, I think she is actually speaking during the opening scene of this movie. Her role in this movie, though, has been significantly expanded upon. Firstly, we do not get any scenes in the book of her before the throne room scene. I also do not remember her being an acute student of the Bene Gesserit. If anything, I remember her lacking much Bene Gesserit potential, and was instead meant to be used as a pawn in the Bene Gesserit maneuverings. Which is why Irulan's mother was forbidden from bearing any male children, so that the Bene Gesserit could marry Irulan to their Kwisatz Haderach that had intended to be bred from a union between Jessica's daughter to a Harkonnen male had she not disobeyed and had Paul instead. For the movie, though, Irulan is much more involved in the Bene Gesserit's inner circle, and is even going so far as to be advising and withholding information from her father, the Emperor Shaddam IV. Irulan in the throne room scene played out very similarly, with her ultimately joining Paul in marriage. She is described as haughty in the books, and goes into this union confident she'll be able to manipulate Paul. The Emperor himself is also a character that is mostly referenced in the book, and is a background character up until the end. In the book, he is, I believe, in his 60s, but maintains the appearance of a youthful 35-year-old through heavy spice consumption. He is the ruler of the known universe, and the biggest difference in the book is that he eventually recognized the threat Arrakis poses with the Fremen people living in such harsh environment, creating a people that actually rivals his own Sardaukar, which are bred on a prison planet with similar harsh conditions. The Emperor is the one who is pulling the strings behind House Harkonnen, and had them dispatch the Duke on Arrakis because he felt threatened by his adopted cousin, Duke Leto, who is charismatic and had gained favor among the great houses. Shaddam also worried about Leto's small army he had been training, which could rival his own Sardaukar. It is then ironic that he sent Leto to a planet with a force that could, with the right figurehead, overthrow his rule. A lot of this information is hinted at or directly said in the movie, but without a rewatch, I'm not sure if it's exactly the same. After the throne room scene, Shaddam is banished to his old prison planet Solusa Secundus with his 4 youngest daughters. I don't believe any of them are mentioned in the movie, but they don't play a significant role anyway. In the book, Shaddam is not forced to kneel and kiss Paul's ducal ring. So in the books, it would be the tent scene from Part 1 that Paul discovers from his newly awakened prescient vision, combined with his mentat ability, that his mother, Jessica, is the Baron's secret daughter. This fact was hidden from even Jessica herself, making them Harkonnens and the Baron his grandfather. I kind of thought this was being held back for a bigger moment in the movie, but instead, to me at least, the revelation fell a bit flat. Paul's journey in the book and movie is perhaps the most similar from anyone else. In the book, Paul is definitely more proactive and is doing what is necessary to survive. He is more accepting of his role while also trying to prevent the inevitable jihad, which all paths seem to lead to. When he takes the water of life, his prescient vision expands and he is able to see the present as well and can see the Emperor and guild ships orbiting above Arrakis. He also gains a sort of awareness or connection to Alia, who is able to leave him messages updating him. My interpretation of the book is that Paul has seen many futures more clearly now and has an idea of what he needs to do to get him a chance at preventing the jihad, and to do so he must take the throne. That being said though, there are still instances where he is not sure what path exactly he is on, and he notices differences that lead to branching paths. In the throne room scene in the book, Paul notices differences from any vision he had witnessed. In the book, during this scene, Paul notices Count Finring, who is a failed Kwisatz Haderach, and Paul speculates that's why he never saw him in any of his visions. I feel like the movie does a decent enough job showing Paul's vision at the end. In the movie, after drinking the water of life, Paul makes it sound a bit more daunting in saying how there's a narrow gap or one outcome in which he makes it, and I believe that it shows a knife indicating his battle with Feyd-Rautha. In the book, the relationship between the spice and the sandworms is explained much better, along with the effects of the spice in general. So the quick explanation is that the sandworms create the spice, so you can't rid the world of sandworms or else you have no more spice. The spice is imperative for navigating through space, so spice is the ultimate commodity, and I believe in part 1 this is more or less stated in the very beginning. Now the spice is also a poison, so as soon as you begin taking it, your body becomes dependent upon it. You then essentially become trapped on Arrakis, or must continually take it while off planet. At the end of the movie, we see Paul threaten to destroy the spice with his family's atomics. This is an oversimplification of what he threatens to do in the book, which is to poison the little makers at a pre-spice mass with the altered water of life, creating a chain reaction resulting in the death of all the sandworms and ultimately the spice. Like the movie though, Paul uses some of the atomics to blow through the shield wall and swarm the Emperor riding in on sandworms. At the very end of the film, perhaps the biggest change is that it is said that the guild does not recognize Paul's legitimacy to the throne despite taking Irulan's hand in marriage. This is an odd change because it makes Chani running off kind of pointless, since Paul's marriage to Princess Irulan seems to be a sham, at least at the end of this movie. In the book, this does not happen. Something I forgot to mention earlier is that when Paul partook in the water of life, he actually opened up his mind to the male and female ancestry, which is what the Kwisatz Haderach is able to do, something that the Bene Gesserit cannot do. They cannot access that part of their mind with the male ancestry line. Dune Part 2 is not the most faithful adaptation of the book, and it is not the adaptation I really wanted, especially because Alia is my favorite character. But that is not to say it's not an enjoyable film, and while I may not fully agree with some of the decisions made, I do believe it is trying to honor the source material while setting up what will seemingly be a conclusion in the third film, Dune Messiah. If this is really supposed to be a trilogy, I will hold my judgment on this film until after I see where some of these plot threads are going in the third film. Let me know what you think of all the changes in the comments below, and for more Dune and other sci-fi fantasy content, consider subscribing to the channel. If this Dune video does well, I will likely continue making Dune content as I reread the rest of the Dune saga, and may finally venture into the expanded universe, which is its own can of worms. Sandworms, that is.